So now we're going to kind of build upon what we've already learned with, making variables and then being able to output and input variables. We're going to take that together and combine it. We're going to learn how to make a calculator. And so what this is going to do is it's going to enable us to kind of just, reiterate the input and output, but also look into some other things that we haven't really looked at first yet. So let's go ahead and declare two variables. We're going to declare the first variable, we're going to call it number1, and we're going to set that equal to 0, and we're also going to make another variable, number2. We're going to set that equal to 0. And then let's go ahead and ask the user to input two numbers. So please input two values, and then we're going to cin number 1, and then we're also going to cin number 2. Now, here's a little bit of a talking point. Similar to how we are able to combine multiple cout statements to one line, we can also combine multiple cin statements. So we can take the cin here and basically bring number 1 and number 2 in at the same time. So now we have created our variables, we have assigned them initially to 0. Now through the user input, we've assigned it whatever the user is inputting through the keyboard to the console. And now, last but not least, we should take our variables and essentially assign, take them and output what their sum is. So the sum of, and then number 1 and number 2 is, and then here we want to do number 1 plus number 2. So now if we go ahead and we build and run this, you'll see it asks you for two values. I'm going to input 5 and 10. And the sum of 5 and 10, of course, is 15. If you look back at your code, it's very kind of obvious how we get to this. We take the variables, we declare them, make them actually exist, and then we ask the user for what their values should be. And once we have those values from the user, we then re-output that variable, those two variables, and then we output their sum. But the one thing that there's a couple limitations to this, and the first one is really what happens when I try to output a variable value that's a number, but it's not necessarily an integer value. And if you go back here, and so we input 2.5, let's say. It says the sum of 2 and 0 is 2. Well, what you should realize is that on inputting that 2.5, it never actually asked for that second value. So it did actually, it rounded down on the 2, but it never actually asked for the second number value. But it also ignored the decimal place in the 2.5. And so the way we get around that is because what's happening is it's expecting an integer value with that cin there, because the variable type of number 1 and number 2, of course, are both are both integers, and so 2.5 is not an integer. So what we need to do is we need to change this to a type of value that will accept the output of the value. So let's go ahead and declare a float and another float here. And what a floating point value is, it's a decimal number. And it's a decimal number that allows up to a certain amount of decimal places. If you want it to do something else, like more precise, you could do what's called a double type precision here. We're just going to use a float for the purposes of this tutorial. And what we want to do is first we want to exit our last program. Now we want to, once again, build and run. And what you'll see happening is please input two values. And so we can input, say, 2.5 and 2.75, and it will print out the sum of 2.5 and 2.75 is 5.25. So it's just like the last tutorial, the last program we ran, but now we can use floating point values. The other thing that you need to really know about the way variables work is you only are actually assigning a value, so number 1 and number 2 only actually change whenever there's like an equal sign there going to it. If not, you're just performing an operation on that variable and then creating another integer value, integer or whatever value you happen to have, so float, double, etc. So with number 1 plus number 2 down here, yes, we are outputting this, but these two variables never actually change. They stay exactly the same. So what we could do is we could have another float, and we could call this total. And for that total, we could set it equal to 0. And what that total is going to be is it's going to equal number 1 plus number 2. So now that addition that we were doing down here in the print statement is done there. So we can take the number 1 plus number 2 from down here and replace that with total and let it print out there. And I made one really big mistake here. I left that float here on this total. You don't need that because it's already declared up there. So we have that going pretty well. The one last thing I want to change is, so let's go ahead and run this and see what it does. So let's say I'm to put in 2.8588, and then I also put in 2.9595. Well, it's going to print out 5.818, which is, it is the sum of those two numbers. But I really don't like having the 4 decimal places there, and I want to round it. Let's say I wanted to round it. And there's a lot of different I/O manipulation operators that you can have within C and C++. And so we're going to go back up here to the top, and we're going to pull in a new library. It's called I/O manip. So we're going to pull that in, and this will allow us to manipulate the output that's happening here. So what we want to do now is come back down here, and right before total, we want to say set precision. And we want to set precision to 2, and we also want to call fixed. So looking back here, I added set precision, and then 2 more less than signs, and then I added fixed. And what this will do is it'll take the value we're printing out here for the total, and it will round it off to exactly 2 decimal places, which can be pretty powerful if you're looking to output stuff to the screen. There's also a lot of other operators you can do, such as set width and also right align, among other operators. We're not going to go over that for the sake of this tutorial series, but you can look that up and probably figure out how to use it pretty easily. So if you see now, we are now, instead of printing out this big long number, we are printing out a number that is rounded off to 2 decimal places. So that's it for this tutorial. In the next tutorial, we'll be looking into if statements and how we can make our calculator a little bit more flexible.